The morning sun hadn't even fully risen over Los Angeles, but inside the bright, buzzing studio of Good Day Live, the energy was already cranked to 11. Cameras rolled, lights blazed, and the audience, mostly made up of excited fans who'd won tickets through a radio contest, clapped on cue, their faces lit by the glow of their phones as they recorded every second. It was just another Tuesday for the show, but what happened next would ripple far beyond the studio walls. In the middle of the set stood a man in a crisp white chef's coat, sleeves rolled up to show off tattoos of knives and flames. He moved with the kind of swagger that came from years of TV appearances, best-selling cookbooks, and a string of trendy restaurants in major cities. He wasn't just cooking today, he was performing. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed shrimp into a sizzling pan, then turned to the host with a smirk. "People think Spanish food is fancy," he said, voice dripping with mock surprise. "But let's be real. It's mostly just little plates of olives, cold ham, and that weird rice dish everyone pretends to love." The host chuckled nervously, glancing at the camera. "You mean paella?" "Yeah, paella," he scoffed, stirring the pan with exaggerated boredom. "Burnt rice with seafood thrown on top like it's some kind of miracle. I've had better rice at a gas station in New Jersey. And don't get me started on those tiny sandwiches. What are they called?" "Bocadillos." It's like they gave up halfway through inventing lunch. A few people in the audience laughed, unsure if they were supposed to. Others shifted in their seats. One woman, wearing a small pendant shaped like the Spanish flag, frowned and lowered her phone. Backstage, in a quiet green room tucked behind thick soundproof doors, Keanu Reeves sat alone on a plush couch, sipping black coffee from a paper cup. He'd arrived early, as he always did. No entourage, no demands, just a worn leather jacket and a polite good morning to the crew. He was scheduled to appear in 20 minutes to talk about his new film, a quiet drama shot partly in the mountains of northern Spain. He'd spent weeks there the year before, working with local actors, eating at family-run restaurants, learning how to say "thank you" and "this is delicious" in Castilian Spanish. He remembered the way villagers would invite him into their homes without knowing who he was, offering wine and stories late into the night. He remembered the smell of saffron and wood smoke drifting from open kitchen windows. He remembered feeling, for the first time in a long while, like he belonged somewhere. Now, through a small monitor mounted on the wall, he watched the chef's segment unfold. At first he barely paid attention, just background noise while he gathered his thoughts. But then the words cut through. "Peasant slop," the chef said, waving a hand dismissively. "Spain's had centuries to figure out real cuisine, and they're still serving cold tomatoes on bread like it's fine dining." Keanu's grip tightened slightly on his coffee cup. He didn't get angry often. Years of loss, of public scrutiny, of being both adored and misunderstood had taught him to stay calm. But this wasn't just about food. It was about people. Real people, farmers, grandmothers, fishermen, who woke up before dawn to make something honest with their hands. People who didn't care about Michelin stars or TV fame, but who took pride in feeding their neighbors with love. He set the cup down carefully on the table. Not a drop spilled. His eyes stayed on the screen as the chef launched into a story about how he'd fixed traditional Spanish recipes by adding truffle oil and gold leaf. "Because let's face it," the chef said with a wink, "tradition is just another word for outdated." Keanu exhaled slowly. He wasn't planning to say anything. He never liked making scenes. But something about the casual cruelty of it, the way the chef reduced an entire culture to a punchline, sat wrong in his chest, like a stone. Meanwhile, in the control room, producers exchanged glances. The segment was running long, but the chef was a ratings draw, so they let him keep talking. On social media, the backlash had already begun. A food historian in Madrid posted a thread explaining the origins of paella, not as burnt rice, but as a dish born from Valencia's rice fields, cooked over open flames by farm workers who shared one pan to feed many. A chef in Barcelona uploaded a video of his abuela making sofrito the same way she had for 60 years, her hands trembling but steady. "This is not slop," he wrote. "This is memory." Back in the green room, Keanu stood up. He smoothed his jacket, checked his watch. 10 minutes until his segment. He walked to the door, paused, then turned back to the monitor one last time. The chef was now holding up a slice of jamón ibérico like it was a joke. "Tastes like salty air and regret," he joked. The audience laughed again. louder this time, caught up in the performance. Keanu didn't smile. He just nodded to himself as if making a quiet promise. Out in the hallway, a young production assistant rushed past, earpiece in, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Reeves? We're ready for you in 5, thanks," Keanu said, his voice calm. "I'll be right there." He took a deep breath. Not to prepare a speech, he didn't plan speeches. He just wanted to speak the truth simply and clearly, the way his Spanish friends had spoken to him, without pretense, without performance. As he walked toward the stage, the sound of applause and laughter grew louder. The chef was wrapping up, taking a bow, flashing that confident grin. The host thanked him. The camera cut away, and the crew began resetting the set for the next guest. Keanu stepped into the wings, just out of view. He could see the host adjusting her notes, the stage manager giving a thumbs up. In a few moments, he'd walk out under those bright lights, sit in that chair, and answer questions about his movie. But something had shifted. The usual script, smile, promote, thank the team, felt too small now. He thought about the old man in Seville who'd taught him how to properly hold a glass of Fino sherry. "You don't drink it," the man had said, eyes twinkling. "You listen to it." He thought about the little girl in a village near Granada who'd shyly handed him a handmade bracelet after he helped carry groceries for her grandmother. He thought about the way Spain had welcomed him, not as a star, but as a guest, and now someone had stood on national television and called all of that peasant slop. Keanu Reeves wasn't the type to seek confrontation, but he was the type to stand up for kindness, for respect, for the quiet dignity of everyday people. As the stage manager signaled him forward, he stepped into the light, not with anger, but with purpose. The audience clapped politely. The host smiled warmly. "Keanu, so great to have you back." He sat down, gave his usual soft smile, and waited for the first question. But before it came, he leaned slightly toward the microphone. "You know," he began, voice low but clear, "I just heard something that stuck with me." The host blinked, surprised. "Oh, what's that?" He paused, choosing his words carefully, not to attack but to honor. "Someone said Spanish food is simple. And you know what? They're right. It is simple, but simple doesn't mean easy. It doesn't mean unimportant. Sometimes the most beautiful things in life are simple. A shared meal, a warm hello, a plate of rice cooked with care." He looked out at the audience, his eyes steady. "I've been lucky enough to spend time in Spain, and what I found wasn't slop, I found generosity. I found pride. I found people who treat strangers like family, and that deserves more than a joke." The studio fell quiet. Not the awkward silence of discomfort, but the kind of stillness that comes when something real has been said. In the control room, someone whispered, "Did he just..." On social media, phones lit up again, but this time it wasn't outrage. It was gratitude. And backstage, the chef, still in his white coat, still holding his gold-plated spatula, watched from the shadows, his smirk gone. Keanu didn't mention him by name. He didn't need to. The message was clear. You don't have to shout to be heard. Sometimes all it takes is one quiet voice speaking the truth to change everything. The moment Keanu sat back in his chair after those few quiet sentences, the air in the studio changed. It wasn't dramatic, no gasps, no standing ovation, but something deeper shifted. People leaned forward. The host, who'd been ready to pivot to movie talk, paused. She looked at him, then at the camera, then back again, as if realizing this wasn't just another celebrity interview anymore. "Wow," she finally said, her voice softer now. That really lands." Keanu gave a small nod, no grand gesture, just a human acknowledgement. He didn't smile, but his eyes held warmth. He wasn't trying to shame anyone. He was just speaking from what he'd seen, what he'd felt, and that made all the difference. Backstage, the chef, who'd been watching from the wings with arms crossed, turned on his heel and walked away fast, his polished shoes clicking against the concrete floor. A producer tried to stop him. "Hey, we've got a quick post-segment chat lined up." "No," he snapped, not looking back. "I'm done." Within minutes, clips from the show began popping up online. Not the full segment, just the 30 seconds where Keanu spoke about Spain. Someone clipped it with the caption, "When Keanu Reeves defends a whole country like it's family." Another added soft guitar music and subtitles in Spanish. By lunchtime, it had been shared over 500,000 times. In Madrid, a retired schoolteacher saw the clip while sipping her morning café con leche. She didn't use social media much, but her granddaughter had texted it to her with a heart emoji. The woman watched it 3 times, tears welling up. She remembered her husband, gone 10 years now, who used to make paella every Sunday for their neighbors. Always extra for the new family down the street, always a seat saved for anyone passing by. He never called it fancy, she whispered to her cat. He just called it food for people who matter. In Barcelona, a young chef paused mid-chop while prepping vegetables for lunch service. His phone buzzed on the counter. He wiped his hands, opened the video, and stood there in his apron watching Keanu speak. When it ended, he turned to his team. "We're adding a note to the menu tonight," he said. "Made with respect. Inspired by home." Meanwhile, Keanu had already left the studio. No press junket, no after-show interviews. He'd shaken the host's hand, thanked the crew, and walked out the back door into the California sun. He didn't check his phone. He didn't know yet how far his words had traveled. He just got on his motorcycle, helmet on, and rode toward the coast, same as he did most days when work wrapped early. But the internet didn't sleep. By mid-afternoon, news outlets picked up the story. Hollywood star silences celebrity chef with one sentence near read one headline. Another. Keanu Reeves stands up for Spain and wins the internet. Food bloggers, historians, and everyday Spaniards flooded platforms with stories, photos, recipes, proof that Spanish cuisine wasn't just tapas and rice, but a living tradition woven into daily life. A fisherman in Galicia posted a photo of his hands, rough from decades at sea, holding a bowl of caldo gallego. "This kept my family alive through hard winters," he wrote. Not slop, survival, love. The chef, meanwhile, stayed silent at first. But as the tide turned against him, frustration boiled over. Late that night, he posted a video from his kitchen. He stood in front of gleaming stainless steel counters, arms crossed, jaw tight. "Look," he began, voice sharp. "I never said Spanish food was bad. I said it's overrated. There's a difference. Just because Keanu Reeves had a nice vacation there doesn't make him an expert." He scoffed. Actors love playing hero, don't they? One emotional speech and suddenly they're saving culture. The backlash was instant. Comments poured in. "You mocked an entire nation for laughs. Keanu didn't attack you, he just honored real people. Why does respect threaten you?" Even fellow chefs, some who'd once praised his talent, began distancing themselves. One posted, "Great cooking starts with humility. Without it, you're just making noise." But Keanu still hadn't said a word online. He wasn't on Twitter. Didn't do Instagram lives. His only public presence was through his work and his actions. That evening, he met a friend for dinner at a small family-run spot in Echo Park. The place had red checkered tablecloths, a chalkboard menu in Spanish, and the smell of garlic and smoked paprika in the air. The owner, a man in his 60s with kind eyes and flour on his apron, recognized Keanu immediately but didn't make a fuss. Just nodded, brought out a plate of patatas bravas, and said, "On the house." "For what you said today." Keanu tried to refuse. "No, please. I'm just a guest here," the man smiled. In Spain, guests are family, and family doesn't pay. They talked quietly over dinner, about the chef's hometown near Seville, about how hard it was to keep traditions alive in a world obsessed with trends, about how food wasn't just fuel, but memory. "My mother taught me to cook with my hands," the man said, "but with my heart." Keanu listened. He always listened more than he spoke. Later, walking back to his bike, he thought about that moment in the studio, not with pride, but with a quiet sense of duty. He hadn't done it for attention. He'd done it because it felt wrong to stay silent, because the people he'd met in Spain deserved better than to be laughed at on national TV. The next morning, his phone finally buzzed with messages from his team. His publicist, usually calm, sounded stunned. "Keanu, you have no idea what's happening. Spain is celebrating you." He read a few messages, saw photos of murals being painted in Valencia, with his face beside a steaming paella pan. Read tweets from teachers saying they'd shown the clip in class to talk about respect. One woman wrote, "My abuela cried when she saw you speak. She said, 'Finally someone sees us.'" He didn't reply to any of it. But he did something else. He called a non-profit he'd worked with before, one that supported cultural preservation in rural communities. "I'd like to help," he said simply. specifically with Spanish culinary heritage. Apprenticeships, recipe archives, maybe even a small grant for family kitchens struggling to stay open. The coordinator was quiet for a moment. "Why?" she asked gently. "Because food is how people say I care," he answered. And some people forgot that. Over the next few days, the chef's restaurant bookings dropped by 70%. Influencers canceled collabs. A major kitchenware brand quietly ended their partnership. He tried damage control. Another post, this time more apologetic, but it felt forced, like he was reading lines instead of speaking from the heart. People noticed. Keanu, meanwhile, kept living his life. He visited a local community garden, helped a stranger change a flat tire, went for long rides along the Pacific Coast Highway, the wind clearing his mind. He didn't mention Spain again in public. He didn't need to. His actions spoke louder. And then something unexpected happened. A group of young Spanish chefs, none famous, just passionate, started a movement. They called it Cocina con Respeto, cooking with respect. They shared videos of themselves making traditional dishes exactly as their grandparents taught them. No shortcuts, no flashy twists, just honest food. They tagged Keanu not to flatter him, but to thank him for reminding the world that dignity lives in a well-made tortilla, in a slow-simmered stew, in the way a grandmother stirs her sofrito with the same wooden spoon for 50 years. One video showed a teen in a tiny village near Córdoba, teaching his little sister how to shape croquetas. "This is how we remember," he said to the camera. Not with fancy words, with food. Keanu saw that one. He saved it. He still hadn't planned to say more. But the world kept turning, and sometimes quiet moments ripple further than anyone expects. What mattered wasn't the clash between a chef and an actor. It was the millions of ordinary people who felt seen again, who remembered that their way of life, their recipes, their rituals, their kindness around a shared table wasn't outdated. It was timeless, and Keanu, he just kept showing up, not as a hero but as a human, one who believed that respect costs nothing, but means everything. A week after the talk show aired, the internet was still buzzing, but the noise had changed. It wasn't just about a celebrity chef's rude comments or a movie star's quiet reply anymore. Something deeper had taken root. People weren't just arguing online. They were cooking, sharing, remembering. In kitchens across Spain, grandmothers pulled out old notebooks with handwritten recipes. In cities like Chicago, Sydney, and Toronto, Spanish expats hosted impromptu dinner parties, inviting neighbors over for bowls of gazpacho and stories about home. What started as a moment of tension had quietly turned into a celebration. Keanu didn't see most of it. He wasn't scrolling through feeds or checking trending topics, but his team kept him gently updated. One afternoon, while sitting on a park bench eating a simple sandwich, his assistant handed him a printed packet. Photos, letters, news clippings. "You should see this," she said softly. He flipped through it slowly. A photo of a school in Andalusia, where kids had made a giant paper paella for a class project. Each grain of rice labeled with a word like family, history, or love. A letter from a retired fisherman in Cadiz who wrote, "Thank you for defending what we've spent our lives honoring, not for fame, but for those we feed." There was even a short documentary clip filmed by a university student showing elderly women in a village teaching teenagers how to make migas the old way, crumbs of bread fried with garlic, chorizo, and olive oil, a dish born from hardship but filled with warmth. Keanu folded the papers carefully and tucked them into his jacket pocket. He didn't say much, but his eyes stayed distant for a while, like he was carrying all those stories with him. Meanwhile, the chef's world kept shrinking. His latest restaurant opening, once expected to be a media event, was now met with protests. Not angry mobs, just quiet groups of people, holding signs that read, "Respect the table and tradition isn't." Trendy, it's true. Food critics who once praised his bold reinventions now questioned whether innovation without understanding was just arrogance in a fancy apron. Even his longtime pastry chef quit, posting a simple message, "I love creativity, but I love respect more." Still, the chef refused to fully back down. In a podcast interview, he claimed he was just being honest and accused people of turning food into politics. But the more he talked, the more he sounded out of touch, not just with Spain, but with the very heart of cooking itself. Because real cooking, as anyone who's ever stirred a pot for someone they care about knows, was never just about flavor. It was about connection. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu made a decision. Not a grand announcement, not a press release, just a quiet phone call to a small nonprofit that worked to preserve endangered food traditions around the world. He'd supported them before anonymously with donations that never carried his name. This time he wanted to do more. "I'd like to help Spanish cooks," he said. "Not the famous ones. The ones no one sees. The family-run places, the village bakers, the people keeping old recipes alive because they matter, not because they'll go viral." The director of the organization was moved. "We've been trying to fund a program like that for years," she admitted. "But grants are hard to get for small traditions." "Then let's make it happen," Keanu replied. "And let's keep it simple. No logos, no branding, just support." Within days, plans began forming. A modest fund would be created to offer micro-grants to small kitchens in rural Spain. Enough to fix a broken oven, buy quality ingredients, or train a young apprentice. They'd also partner with local historians to record oral recipes before they disappeared, capturing not just instructions but the stories behind them, who the dish was made for, when it was served, what it meant. Keanu didn't ask for credit. But when the nonprofit gently suggested sharing the news to inspire others, he agreed. On one condition. "Only if it's about the people," he said. "Not me." So when the announcement went live, it wasn't flashy. Just a short post on the nonprofit's website. "Thanks to a generous friend of Spanish culture, we're launching the Cocina Viva initiative, supporting everyday kitchens that keep heritage alive, one meal at a time." At the bottom, a single line. "Gratitude to those who cook with heart." The response was overwhelming. Donations poured in, not huge sums but heartfelt ones. A teacher in Boston sent $25 with a note. "My students and I made tortilla española in class today." They asked why it mattered. Now they know. A retired couple in Oregon donated their grocery savings for the month. "We've never been to Spain," they wrote, "but we believe in honoring where food comes from." In Spain, the news spread fast. In a tiny town in Extremadura, a woman who ran a cafe out of her home, serving only 2 dishes both passed down from her great-grandmother, burst into tears when she heard she'd been selected for a grant. She'd been thinking of closing. Now she'd buy new clay pots, the kind her ancestors used, and teach her granddaughter how to use them. Keanu heard about her through a photo someone sent, a smiling woman holding a steaming pot, standing beside a little girl with flour on her nose. He pinned it to the corkboard in his office right next to a postcard from a film set in the Pyrenees. But the real magic wasn't in the money. It was in the shift. People began talking differently about food. Not as content, not as competition, but as care. A popular cooking channel canceled a planned Extreme Spanish Remix episode and instead aired a special filmed in a village kitchen where an 82-year-old man showed how to make true salmorejo, thick, cold tomato soup blended by hand, served with diced chaman and hard-boiled egg. "This isn't fast," he said to the camera, stirring slowly. "But it's honest. And honesty feeds the soul." Even food critics softened. One wrote, "Maybe the most radical thing a chef can do today is to listen, to tradition, to elders, to the land." As for Keanu, he returned to work. He was filming again, this time a small indie project shot in Northern California. Between takes, he'd sit alone with a thermos of tea, watching the fog roll in off the ocean. Crew members noticed he seemed lighter, not happier exactly, but at peace, like he'd done something that needed doing and now he could just be. One evening, after wrapping a long day, a young grip on set approached him shyly. "Hey," the kid said, holding out his phone. "My mom's from Valencia. She saw what you said on TV. She doesn't speak much English, but she made me promise to tell you. Gracias por vernos." "Thank you for seeing us." Keanu looked at the phone. On the screen was a photo of a woman standing in a sunlit kitchen, holding a wide paella pan. Around her, kids and neighbors laughed, plates in hand. It wasn't a fancy meal, just rice, rabbit, rosemary, and love. He handed the phone back. "Tell her. I'm the one who should thank her," he said, "for keeping the fire going." The kid nodded, eyes bright. She also said, "You're always welcome at her table." Keanu smiled, just a little, but it reached his eyes. "That's the highest honor there is. Later that night, he called his sister. They talked about nothing important, weather, old memories, a dog they once had. But before hanging up, she said, "I saw what you did. You didn't have to speak up, you know." "I know," he replied, "but someone had to." And that was that. No victory lap. No interviews. Just a man who believed that kindness wasn't weakness, and that standing up for others, even quietly, was part of being human. The story kept growing, not because of drama, but because it touched something real. In a world full of noise, people were hungry not just for food but for meaning. And sometimes, all it took was one person choosing respect over ridicule to remind everyone what really matters. Keanu wouldn't call himself a hero. He'd probably say he just said what anyone would have said. But the truth was not everyone did. And that's why his words and his actions echoed so far. Because in the end, it wasn't about Spain or paella or even a chef on TV. It was about dignity. About looking someone in the eye, whether they're a grandparent in a village kitchen or a stranger on the street, and saying without words, "You matter. Your story matters. Your way of caring matters, and that never goes out of style." Weeks passed, and the noise that once filled headlines began to settle, not because people forgot, but because something quieter, stronger had taken its place. The outrage had turned into action. The anger had softened into understanding, and in the middle of it all, Keanu Reeves kept doing what he always did, showing up, helping where he could, and never making it about himself. One morning, he walked into a small print shop in Silver Lake. No fanfare, no security, just a man in a plain black t-shirt and jeans holding a folded sketch in his hand. He'd been working on it for days. Simple line drawings of a steaming bowl of soup, a loaf of crusty bread, an old woman's hands shaping dough. Beneath it, just 3 words. Food is memory. "I'd like to make a few shirts," he told the shop owner, a woman with silver streaks in her hair and ink stains on her apron. Nothing fancy. Cotton, soft. And all the money from sales, every penny, goes to that kitchen fund in Spain. She looked at the design, then at him. "You know this could sell a lot, right?" He shrugged. "Hope so, but only if it helps." She nodded slowly like she understood something deeper. "I'll print the first batch myself." On the house. That weekend, a pop-up appeared outside a bookstore in Echo Park. No banners, no loudspeakers, just a folding table with a stack of t-shirts and a handwritten sign, "Support Spanish Kitchens." 25s, all proceeds donated. People stopped, curious. Then they saw the design. Then they remembered. Within hours, the line stretched down the block. Not because it was trendy, but because it felt true. A college student bought 2. One for her abuela back in Malaga. A couple on their first date each grabbed a shirt, smiling like they'd found something real to connect over. An older man in a worn jacket stood quietly at the back of the line, then handed over a $50 bill and walked away without taking a shirt. "Just give it to them," he said over his shoulder. By sunset, every shirt was gone, and more orders poured in online. The nonprofit's website nearly crashed. But Keanu didn't post about it. He didn't pose for photos or do interviews. He just sent a message to the team in Spain. More help is coming. In a village near Leon, a family-run bakery that had been struggling for years received their grant. They used it to repair their wood-fired oven, the same one their great-grandfather built in 1923. The first morning it worked again. The whole neighborhood smelled like toasted almonds and warm bread. Kids gathered outside, waiting for the first batch of mantecadas, soft sponge cakes their ancestors baked for celebrations. The baker's daughter filmed a short video, not for likes but for her cousins overseas. "Abuelo's oven is alive again," she whispered, tears in her eyes. "We didn't lose it." That video found its way to Keanu. He watched it late at night, alone in his apartment, the city quiet outside his window. He didn't cry, but his throat tightened. He thought about all the things we passed down, not just recipes, but care, patience. The quiet belief that tomorrow matters enough to prepare for it today. Back in the U.S., schools started using the moment as a teaching tool. A teacher in New Mexico turned it into a lesson on cultural respect. Her students interviewed their own grandparents about family dishes, then wrote essays on why food carries history. One kid wrote, "My grandma makes tamales every Christmas. She says the corn remembers the hands that grew it. I never understood that before. Now I do. Even cooking shows changed. A popular network canceled a planned episode where chefs were supposed to reinvent traditional dishes with modern twists. Instead, they aired a special called Hands That Feed Us, featuring home cooks from different cultures preparing meals exactly as they'd been taught, with no judges. No scores, just stories. The Spanish segment showed a fisherman's wife in Cádiz making arroz a banda, a humble rice dish cooked in fish broth, served with aioli on the side. "This isn't restaurant food," she said, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon. "This is survival food, love food. It's what we give when we have nothing else but still want to give everything." The chef who'd started it all watched that episode from his now nearly empty restaurant. He sat at the bar, nursing a glass of water, the chairs around him empty. His phone buzzed, another cancellation, another brand pulling out. He didn't answer. For the first time in years, he felt small. Not humiliated exactly, but seen, and not in the way he liked. He'd spent so long chasing attention that he'd forgotten why he started cooking in the first place. Not for cameras, not for fame, but because his own grandmother had let him stand on a stool beside her stove, handing him garlic cloves and telling him, "Cook with your heart, or don't cook at all." He hadn't listened then. Maybe he was ready to now. Meanwhile, Keanu posted something, his first social media message in over a year. Just a photo, the t-shirt design laid flat on a wooden table beside a small bowl of olives and a glass of red wine. Below it, one sentence: "Food is memory. Food is home. Let's honor both." No hashtags. No call to action. Just truth, plain and simple. The post spread like wildfire, not because it was clever, but because it was kind. People shared it with their own memories. "This is my Lola's adobo. My dad made this stew every winter. This is the bread my village eats at funerals and weddings. Same recipe. Different tiers." The internet, often so loud and sharp, felt softer for a moment. Like a shared breath. In Spain, newspapers ran full-page features not on Keanu, but on the people he'd helped. A photo essay showed apprentices learning to cure jamon the old way, turning pig legs in cool mountain cellars. Another followed a young woman reviving her island's nearly lost method of preserving fish in salt and olive oil. The caption read, "Tradition isn't frozen in time. It's passed hand to hand, heart to heart." Keanu read those articles in print, the paper rough under his fingers. He liked the weight of real pages, the smell of ink. He folded them carefully and stored them in a box with other things that mattered. Letters from fans, ticket stubs from old films, a dried flower from a set in Spain. He still got recognized, of course. But now people didn't just ask for selfies. They told him stories. A woman at a gas station said, "My daughter's studying culinary history now because of what you said." A bus driver in San Francisco handed him a container of homemade tortilla de patatas. "My wife made it. She said if he defends us, he eats like us." He accepted it with both hands. "Tell her thank you." And that it's perfect it was. Golden on the outside, tender within, just like the ones he'd eaten in a tiny bar in Madrid, where the owner played flamenco records and never asked for his autograph. As summer turned to fall, the Cocina Viva Fund expanded. Not with big announcements, but with steady, quiet growth. More kitchens joined. More young people signed up to learn. A university in Seville even created a short course on oral food history, teaching students how to interview elders and archive recipes before they're lost. And through it all, Keanu stayed in the background. He answered emails from the nonprofit team, sent handwritten notes to a few of the cooks. Once he quietly paid off the medical bill of an elderly baker who'd written him a letter, not because he expected anything, but because he could. He never called it charity. He called it connection. One evening, while walking his dog near Griffith Park, he passed a group of kids filming a school project. They spotted him, froze for a second, then one shyly stepped forward. "Mr. Reeves, we're doing a video on people who make the world better without trying to be famous. Can we ask you one question?" Keanu crouched down to their level. "Sure. What's the most important thing you've learned about helping others?" He thought for a moment, the dog leaning against his leg. "That it's not about being seen," he said gently. "It's about seeing others." The kids nodded like they understood. And maybe they did. Later, as he walked home under a sky full of stars, he felt something rare. Peace. Not because everything was fixed, life was never that simple, but because he'd done what felt right without expecting anything back. And in doing so, he'd reminded people that kindness isn't weakness, that respect isn't old-fashioned, that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is stand up, not with fists, but with heart, and that, more than any movie or headline, was worth remembering. Months had passed since that morning talk show, and the world had moved on, as it always does. New headlines came and went. New controversies flared and faded. But in certain corners of life, the ripples from that one quiet moment were still spreading, steady and deep, like roots growing underground. In a small coastal town in Valencia, a modest tapas bar tucked between a bookstore and a flower shop unveiled a new dish on its chalkboard menu. No fanfare, no press release, just 3 words written in neat cursive: La humildad de Keanu. Inside, the owner, a man with salt and pepper hair and hands weathered from decades of chopping, stirring and serving, placed the first plate on a table by the window. It wasn't fancy. Saffron-infused rice cooked slowly in a wide pan, roasted red peppers, artichokes, a few plump shrimp, and a drizzle of local olive oil. Beside it, a small slice of crusty bread and a glass of crisp white wine. A simple meal, honest, full of care. An elderly couple, regulars for over 20 years, looked up from their usual order of patatas bravas. "What's this?" the woman asked, pointing to the new item. The owner smiled. "It's for someone who reminded us that our food matters, not because it's trendy, but because it's true." They ordered it, took their first bites in silence. Then the man wiped his eyes with a napkin and said, "Tastes like my mother's kitchen." That night, someone posted a photo of the dish online. Not for clout, just because it felt right. The caption read, "This is how we say thank you in Spain," with a full plate and an open heart. By morning, people were making pilgrimages, not to see a celebrity, but to taste a gesture of gratitude. Tourists asked for it. Locals brought their grandchildren to try it. And every time it was served, the owner would say the same thing: "Eat slowly. This isn't fast food. It's family food." Back in Los Angeles, Keanu heard about it through a postcard. No return address, just a photo of the chalkboard menu and a note in careful handwriting. "You are always welcome here. The rice is waiting." He kept it on his nightstand next to a small stone he'd picked up on a beach in Galicia. He never made a big deal of it. Never posted about it. But sometimes late at night he'd look at that postcard and feel something warm in his chest. Not pride, but connection. Like a thread had been tied between him and a place, a people, who'd shown him kindness when he needed it most. Meanwhile, the chef who'd once mocked Spanish food sat alone in his now-closed restaurant. The lights were off. The chairs were stacked on the tables. He'd spent weeks in silence, not out of shame, but reflection. He'd traveled, not for press, but for understanding. He'd visited a village in Andalusia, where an old woman let him sit in her kitchen for 3 days, watching her make gazpacho the way her mother had, using tomatoes still warm from the sun. She never asked who he was. She just handed him a spoon and said, "Taste, then tell me what you feel." He cried that night, not because the soup was perfect, though it was, but because it carried love in every drop. And he realized he'd spent years chasing applause while forgetting the soul of what he did. Weeks later, he appeared on a different kind of show, not a flashy morning program, but a quiet podcast about food and humility. He didn't defend himself, didn't make excuses, just spoke plainly. "I was wrong," he said, voice rough but sincere. "I confused confidence with arrogance. I thought being bold meant tearing things down. But real strength is in honoring what came before you. Spain's food isn't simple because it's easy. It's simple because it trusts the ingredients, the hands, the heart. And that's something I didn't understand until I listened." The response wasn't instant forgiveness, but it was respect. People appreciated the honesty. A few Spanish chefs even reached out, not to scold, but to invite. "Come cook with us," one wrote. Not to change our food, to learn it. He accepted. Keanu heard about the apology through a mutual friend. He didn't gloat, didn't comment publicly, but when asked in a rare interview months later what he thought, he just said, "We all make mistakes. What matters is what we do after." That line became a quiet mantra for many. Teachers used it in classrooms. Parents repeated it to their kids. It wasn't about excusing harm. It was about believing people can grow. As the year turned, the Cocina Viva Fund had helped over 50 small kitchens across Spain. Apprentices who'd once thought of leaving their villages for big cities now stayed, proud to carry on their family's legacy. A documentary crew filmed a short film about them, not as victims of modernity but as guardians of something precious. It ended with a shot of a young girl in a sunlit courtyard, teaching her little brother how to roll meatballs the way their abuela taught her. "You have to press gently," she said, "or they'll fall apart." The film won a small award at a festival in San Sebastian. The prize money went straight back into the fund. Keanu never saw the film, but he got a letter from the girl's grandmother, thanking him for giving us back our pride. He wrote back by hand on simple stationery. "You never lost it. You just needed someone to notice." Life, as it always does, returned to its rhythm. Keanu went back to making movies, riding his motorcycle, stopping to help strangers with flat tires or heavy groceries. He avoided the spotlight not out of shyness, but because he believed real life happened in the quiet moments, in shared meals, in listening, in showing up when no one's watching. But in Spain, his name became something else. Not a celebrity, but a symbol of quiet decency. School children learned about El Actor Amable, the kind actor who stood up for their culture without raising his voice. In one village, a community center painted a mural. Keanu sitting at a long table filled with people of all ages, passing a bowl of rice, everyone smiling. No words, just togetherness. Years later, when asked why that moment mattered, a food historian put it simply. He didn't save Spanish cuisine. It was never in danger. But he reminded the world that ordinary people, the ones who cook in home kitchens, who feed neighbors without asking for thanks, are worthy of respect. And that changed everything. Keanu never called it a victory. He didn't think in those terms. To him, it was just doing the right thing when it was needed. Nothing more, nothing less. One spring afternoon, he finally returned to Spain. Not for a premiere, not for press, just for himself. He landed in Madrid, took a train south, and ended up in that same village near Granada where a little girl once gave him a handmade bracelet. She was a teenager now. She recognized him instantly, not from movies, but from the mural in the plaza. "You came back," she said, eyes wide. "I promised I would," he replied. Her grandmother, older, slower but still sharp-eyed, invited him in. No fuss, just a table set for two, a pot of stew simmering on the stove, the scent of rosemary filling the air. They ate in comfortable silence for a while. Then she said, "You know, after you spoke that day, people stopped apologizing for our food. They started saying, 'This is who we are, that's a gift.'" Keanu shook his head. "You gave me the gift. You welcomed me like family when I was just a stranger." She reached across the table and patted his hand. "That's what family does." As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in gold and violet, Keanu sat on the porch with a cup of herbal tea, listening to the crickets and the distant sound of laughter from the village square. He felt at peace, not because he'd changed the world, but because he'd helped protect something beautiful that was already there. And that, more than any headline or applause, was enough. There was no grand finale, no final curtain call, because real life doesn't work that way. But in the quiet corners of the world, long after the cameras stopped rolling and the headlines faded, something gentle kept growing. It wasn't loud. It didn't trend. But it mattered. A year after that talk show moment, a small food festival took place in a sun-drenched plaza in a village outside Seville. No corporate sponsors, no influencers posing for photos. Just wooden tables, strings of fairy lights, and the smell of garlic, smoke, and slow-cooked beans filling the air. Local families brought dishes their grandparents had taught them to make. Stews simmered for hours, bread baked in clay ovens, desserts sweetened with honey from nearby hives. At the center of it all stood a simple sign, "Comida con respeto," food with respect. Among the guests was a man many recognized but no one treated like a star. He wore a faded denim shirt, carried a cloth bag with a water bottle and a notebook, and sat at the end of a long table filled with elders, kids, and cooks who'd never seen a TV studio. He didn't speak much, just listened, smiled, passed the bread when it came his way. When a little boy shyly offered him a bite of his homemade tortilla, he accepted it with both hands and said, "Gracias. Está deliciosa." The boy beamed like he'd won a prize. Later, as the sun dipped below the rooftops and guitar music drifted from a corner of the square, Someone asked him why he kept coming back. He looked out at the crowd, neighbors sharing wine, teenagers laughing over plates of grilled peppers, an old man teaching his grandson how to properly peel a garlic clove, and said, "Because this is where life happens. Not on screens, not in headlines. Here, around a table." That night no one took selfies with him. No one shouted his name. They just made room for him at the table like he belonged, and in that moment he did. Back home, life continued as it always had for him. Quiet, purposeful, unpretentious. He still rode his motorcycle through the hills at dawn, still stopped to help someone change a tire on the freeway, still visited his favorite bookstore just to browse, never asking for special treatment. But something had shifted inside him, subtly. He carried the weight of what had happened, not as a burden, but as a reminder that words matter, that silence can be a choice, and that standing up for others, even quietly, can plant seeds that grow long after you've walked away. Meanwhile, the ripple kept spreading in ways no one could have predicted. In a high school in Chicago, a student group started a cultural kitchen club. Every month, they'd invite a family from a different background to cook a traditional meal with them. They began with Spanish cuisine, making paella from a recipe sent by a grandmother in Valencia, and ended with a discussion about what food means when it's tied to memory, migration, and identity. The teacher who advised the club said, "These kids aren't just learning to cook, they're learning to listen." In Japan, a chef who'd once specialized in deconstructed European dishes quietly removed the word deconstructed from his menu. Instead, he started offering a weekly grandmother's plate, a simple, traditional dish from a different culture each week, served exactly as it was meant to be. He wrote on his website, "Perfection isn't in reinvention. It's in preservation." Even the chef who'd sparked it all found a new path. He didn't reopen his flashy restaurants. Instead, he bought a small farmhouse in the countryside of Castilla-La Mancha and turned it into a cooking retreat, not for celebrities, but for home cooks who wanted to learn traditional methods. He taught them how to cure olives, ferment bread dough, and cook beans the old way, with patience, not pressure. He never mentioned Keanu by name, but in his welcome letter to guests he wrote, "True flavor comes not from ego, but from empathy." Keanu never visited the retreat. He didn't need to. He heard about it through a mutual friend and simply nodded. "Good," he said. That's how it should be. Years passed. The t-shirts stopped selling. The hashtags faded. But the change remained. In kitchens, in classrooms, in the way people spoke about food and culture. It wasn't perfect. There were still loud voices, still careless jokes, still moments when tradition was treated like a costume. But now there were also more people willing to say, gently but firmly, "That's not right." And often, they'd remember the actor who'd done it first, not with anger, but with grace. One winter evening, Keanu received a package with no return address. Inside was a small ceramic bowl, hand-painted with blue vines and the words "Para quien escucha," for the one who listens. Tucked beneath it was a note. "My abuela made this before she passed. She said to send it to the man who reminded the world that our hands have stories. Use it for your soup. It'll taste better." He used it that night, filled it with a simple broth, some vegetables, a slice of bread on the side, sat at his kitchen table, steam rising in the quiet room. He didn't post about it, didn't tell anyone. But as he ate, he thought about all the unseen hands that had shaped this moment. The grandmothers stirring pots, the fishermen hauling in the day's catch, the kids learning to roll dough, the strangers who chose kindness over convenience. He thought about how easy it is to forget that every culture, every tradition, every recipe carries someone's love, and how powerful it is when someone finally sees it. The story never really ended because it wasn't just his story. It belonged to everyone who chose respect over ridicule, connection over performance, humility over noise. It lived in the teenager in Valencia, who now teaches cooking classes at her community center. In the retired teacher in Madrid who mails handwritten recipes to pen pals around the world. In the quiet nod between strangers who recognize each other not by fame but by shared values. And in the end, that's what lasted. Not the clash, not the drama, but the choice to care. Keanu never called himself a hero. He'd probably say he just said what needed saying. But the truth is, most people stay silent when it's easier. Most people look away when it's uncomfortable. He didn't. And in that small act of courage, soft-spoken, grounded, human, he gave others permission to do the same. Now, when people visit that tapas bar in Valencia and order La Humildad de Keanu, they don't just eat a dish. They take part in a quiet promise to honor the hands that feed us, the stories that shape us, and the simple truth that kindness, served warm, without fanfare, is the most nourishing meal of all. And somewhere, on a quiet street in Los Angeles or a winding road in Andalusia, a man rides his motorcycle into the sunset, not looking back, not seeking praise, just living the way he believes we all should. With eyes open, heart ready, and hands willing to help. Because the real story was never about one moment on TV. It was about what we do after. And that story, it's still being written. One honest meal, one kind word, one quiet act of respect at a time.